Hi, and welcome back to the Anchored Podcast. My name is Michael Border.
And I am Caitlin Border, and it's been a while since we've been on. We've had our first 3 episodes, but we're back at it and hope to get back at it, on our bi-weekly schedule. Today, we are going to be inviting Olivia Sims on our podcast, and we'll kind of get into our topic and our agenda for the day. But first, I'm going to let Olivia introduce herself. She's a longtime member at our church, and she is going into her junior year at Athens, and we're really excited for her and to see all that she's going to be doing in her future. But if you want to talk about yourself or your experience at college or things like that.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Olivia Sims. I am a junior at Ohio University in their nursing program. I was born into this church, and I've gone here my whole life, like Caitlin said. And this past year, I did my first year at OU main campus, and I got involved with some really good organizations, Crew at OU being one of the main ones. And I just got to learn so much more about my faith, so I'm really excited to delve into that today.
Yeah, we're going to kind of be talking, our title for the day is The Church Beyond Sunday. So we're going to kind of be talking about what life as a Christian could be like or should be like beyond the, your Sunday schedule. And I kind of wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of talk. She's had an internship at our church this summer. And like she said, she's in the nursing program now, but I know you kind of want to do things along with your faith outside of your main career, if you want to talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so my whole life I've always known that I wanted to do something that was going to help people. I didn't really know where that was going to be. I think for a long time I couldn't decide, if I wanted to be a doctor, which, was the plan for, I'd say, probably most of my life until, really late in high school. And I was thinking anesthesiology, and I was kind of, looking into that. And then I was like, I feel like I want more hands-on. I don't want to be in and out of a patient's room, not really hands-on with them. And then, my grandma, she was a nurse, and she, kind of mentored me and helped me figure out that there's, such thing as a nurse anesthetist, and just kind of what that would look like. And so I shadowed, a couple of different people, one of them being Amanda Smith, who's in this church, wonderful lady. And so I came to realize that there were other things I could do, just within that background. And so then, when I went to school and I started exploring my faith, for the first time on my own and not with my family or my church here. And I then started to meet all these different people, and it was really interesting to see, how they were using that in whatever they decided to do. You've got engineers, journalists, dance majors, music majors, whatever it is they decided to do, how they were using their faith within that. And so I think until I went to school, I always thought the only people who are really using their faith every day are pastors, preachers, those kind of people, chaplains. And so it was really interesting for me to figure out this can be something that I do every day. It's not, just
Right.
that one day of the week.
Right. And I think that's we've talked on our prior podcast when, with ourselves, and then when John was here as well, our pastor, that, a lot of your outreach with your Christianity goes based off of what you're good at. Some people feel I just have a regular job. It wasn't really something I planned for. I work here and it's just how things ran. I don't really have a talent or gift. But I think, we're all created with those certain talents or those certain gifts that help us reach out to the community, whether that be through music, whether that be through cooking, whether that be through anything else. And that is such a major outreach, which you're kind of saying you experienced at OU, that you have a plethora of different people, but they're all in their own way, serving God.
I think that's exactly it though too, because kind of how you said, how you can use it every day. I truly think this year was just so pivotal in that too, because I don't know how to word it. Just being able to realize that my desire to care for people, while I decided I did want that to be medical and I am doing nursing, it was so interesting for me to learn more about how caring for people includes spirituality too.
Absolutely.
And learning how you have to meet them where they are, wherever that may be. And that's kind of thrown around a lot, but I don't think people truly realize where you may be meeting them. And sometimes it's not a pretty place.
No.
And so learning that while I can use spirituality in nursing, that's one of people's darkest moments. People meet some really bad situations in clinical settings. And so realizing that that can be a place that I meet them both, hands-on, nursing care, but also, you know, spirituality and helping them find God in those moments.
Right. And I think we find that in teaching too, you know, with us both being music teachers, you know, kind of gotten a new position where I'll be teaching at the high school level like my husband, but I mean, I'm sure at the 6 through 12 level and then myself at the K through 6 level that, you know, you have students come in and maybe they don't have the greatest family life, or, you know, there's some deep things that they're starting to go through and understand in their life. And while I'm not saying, you know, if you had God on your side, you know, things would, but being that person and being that disciple and just being there for a person really shows your character and how you can help one another.
Yeah, and like living like Christ in your life
Exactly.
is a great way that you share that kind of faith with other people. You know, you can't always just preach from the mountaintops all the time. You still have those moments in life where you sit down and you're like, this is my job. I have to teach kids, or I have to administer help for this person. But you can still do it with your faith and guided through your faith in that way that it's like, this person's different. This person is more than just a caregiver or a teacher. They are helping me through something.
Right.
So.
And that's exactly it. Like, you guys would know this too as teachers, but like, it's not practical, or like, it doesn't make sense. Like, you can't always like verbally explain something to someone. Like, you can't like constantly, like you said, be preaching something at someone. Like,
Right.
kids, especially for you guys as teachers, like, are truly just in any situation, people learn best by, you know, seeing, by
Example.
watching, by example. And so, you know, how can we expect others to, you know, want Christ for their own lives if we're not displaying it to them in our own lives? Like, it doesn't
Agree.
work.
And I think that's a really good transition on kind of what we're talking about today, the Church Beyond Sunday. I'll kind of ask you some questions in, you know, things on that, like your definition of a church, because I think everyone has their own role. And I'm not just talking about the church as a building, but I'm talking about the church as a community. So I guess my first question for you is what would be your definition, or what would a church look like for you? I mean, we've grown up in our own church but together, and we've kind of seen, you know, we talked the other day about, like, you know, you went off to college and you learned, you know, that there's more to church than just one singular building, because you've seen examples of other Christ-like people. So what is your definition of, you know, the church, or being the church?
So I kind of love that you like said it like that too, because like growing up, my dad and I like would sit beside each other in the pew like every week, and
Right.
he would like always do like the hand little thing that was like, this is the church and here's the steeple when you open the doors, and like here's all the people, or whatever it is.
Right.
And like for me, that truly is what the church is. It's the people. And like the church, the church, I mean, church is a building, you know, the church buildings, but at the same time, like that building means nothing. It's just a vessel. Like it's
Right.
it's what's going on inside of the doors. It's the people who meet there. It's the spiritual awakenings that happen there. It's the way people meet God
Right.
meet there. And so that's why I'm like, sometimes when I'm thinking about church, and like how you said, like at me at school this year, like this was truly my first time stepping away from Central Trinity and like learning what faith looked like on my own. And
Right.
that was like kind of really scary
Very.
because, you know, I was so used, and I said this in my sermon last week, like everything I had ever experienced was done the Central Trinity way.
Absolutely.
And so all of a sudden I'm the only person, you know, from my hometown, from my church, you know,
Yep.
in this big, you know, group of people, and I'm watching all these people, I'm like, oh, like I never would have done that way. Like that would have
Right.
never been, you know, expressed in my church. And like people just being so open about, you know, their struggles, their sins, their, you know, their mountaintop moments, like anything. And like, it's just so interesting to like see how that looks for all different groups.
Right.
And so I really do think like overall my like personal definition of church would be a group of people that meet together, that disciple one another, that are all, you know, running the race for Jesus, like to spread his word, to share
Right.
his gospel, and to love others well.
Well, and I liked your, you know, open the doors, see all the people.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, I think it was John that said that, you know, there should be no people,
Yeah.
because your community outreach in your Christianity should be doing and giving back and showing the example to be a disciple.
When we talk about, like, you know, the sermons happen on Sunday, but your service happens throughout the week.
Yes.
And it's the fact that, you know, we always say, come to our 9 o'clock service or come to our 10:30 service.
Right.
But it really should be, you know, our service is us going out and serving people, not just, you know, the sermon that we come in. Somebody explained it to me one time where it was, you know, we go throughout our week, and if you have, you know, a comparison to that, it's like a, you know, white towel as you go throughout your week. You know, you're cleaning off desks, you're cleaning off all this other things, you're getting your towel dirty, and it's getting worse and worse, and your towel finally gets to the point where it's like, it doesn't even look like a white towel anymore. It kind of looks like a dirty towel. And when you come to church, it should be that washing machine for your towel. It should
Right.
get
Yeah.
back to
That's a good example.
complete, you know, pure white again. So then you go throughout the week and you serve using that, you know, cleanliness that you got in church, or that idea that you got through church, to serve throughout the week, and then come back the next week to clean yourself, and then go back and go again. And not, you know, clean yourself in like I'm washing my body, but like clean yourself in like a, you know, a mental refresh of,
Right.
you know, I've been living this week and I've been doing this certain way. What if I change my mindset? Instead of, you know, crucifying this person, what if I decide to help them this week?
Right.
What if I, instead of fighting my coworkers, what if I decide that we sit down and figure out a plan that works best for both of us?
Right.
So,
And I love that you said it that way too, because like I would give this creator credit if I knew who it was, but I saw this video earlier this week about, you know, the difference between Martha churches and Mary churches. And if you don't know what that's in reference to, in Luke chapter 10 verses 38 through 42, there is a story about Martha and Mary, and basically Jesus comes to Martha's home, and you know, while there, Mary, like her first instinct is just to like bow to the feet of Jesus and just be with him and just sit with him and worship him. But Mary is more so worried about like serving Jesus in the terms of like preparing her home and making sure things are clean, and like, you know, like kind of like that motherly instinct of like, oh, let me make sure my house like is appealing and, you know, good enough for you to be here. And so kind of the main idea that this person had was that, you know, there are Martha churches and there are Mary churches. There are Martha churches that, you know, all they really focus on is how they can serve, and, you know, what projects can they do, what service can they do, how can they help the community, and that's important. It is. And then there are Mary churches where, you know, their main mission is just how can we find Jesus the best that we can, how can we be with him, how can we grow with him, and that's important as well. But I really do think like the most important thing in a church is finding a way to find a balance between those things.
Yeah.
You know, we learned that, you know, we are saved by grace through faith, so that's the Mary, but we're also told that, you know, faith without acts and works is dead. And so we have to have both of those things. You know, we have to have the service, but we also have to have the relationship. We can't have one without the other.
Right. And I, you know, going back on that, like you were talking about, like when you went off to college, that you only knew the Methodist way. And I like how you said neither of those are wrong. You know, each church in itself, each building, all the people in the church are different, and you create your own community based off what you have. And I really like that you said neither is wrong, but finding that balance. And, you know, and just learning that, you know, outside of your Sunday service, you know, I think that you're, you know, like you kind of said, that your Sunday service is to learn, it's to find your answers and then spread the word of God and the gospel throughout the week.
mm-hmm.
And I guess I was thinking too, like, I believe it was your mom's church, but I really liked that they have one day a year, and I'll kind of let Michael explain it, where they aren't in the church.
Yeah. So, I've went to many churches, but one of the past ones I went to was a non-denominational, and they do consistent days where one in the winter, they'll give all their volunteers a day off, and they will not have church in the building, and you can just watch church online, or you can go serve or do something outside of the church. And it's kind of their, you know, way of saying, thank you for, you know,
But for
doing
the
this.
recent one,
But
yeah.
they also do other things where they reach out to the community, and it's kind of like a community impact day where they won't do church in the building. They will send out groups to different communities. And some people will go clean up a park or paint parks, or they'll go help, you know, mulch a fire station or clean up around places that kind of need it. Go to a homeless shelter, help them clean up their buildings so that it's, you know, a little bit easier for them throughout the week. These ideas that, you know, this is our church today. Our church for the day isn't sitting down, listening to a pastor preach, going throughout our day, going to lunch afterwards. Our church is going into the community and helping the people in need, or the people who, you know, don't ask for the help, but we still reach out and we say, yes, we're helping you.
And I think that's where that spiritual growth comes from, you know, finding, you know your life, you know your story, you know your perspective, and you know who you are in your own shoes, but seeing how others live, whether that be good, whether that be great, and seeing, you know, that different perspective on the, you know, how other people's environments are, and sharing the word in any way that you can in those different, ways.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any examples that you would say for yourself that like Michael was talking about, like, or seeing that at, in your college or things like that in Cru, of someone sharing the gospel or sharing their story outside of the church?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I like absolutely love the community of Cru, like, because not only did it help me like just learn so much more about God, but it also helped me learn so much more about myself. And so one of like my favorite ways that I enjoy listening to like others and like just their story is, so we have 180 on Thursdays. That's kind of like our equivalent of like a church service. But within that, like they have their own special time for like personal testimony. They call it a 180 story. And so like people will get up there and they'll like give their own story about, like where they were before they found God, how they found God, what happened after that, kind of like a cause and effect. And like just listening to their stories is so powerful, because you're like, for people who grew up in the church and maybe have always had God, like there's just so much more there, like truly realizing like, okay, yes, I personally was someone who grew up in the church, but I definitely had a come to Jesus moment where I was like, oh, like this was, my moment that I found God, where like truly everything changed, like where my life started to look different. And so like listening to these stories, it kind of helped me realize like, oh, you don't have to have, like some people do have a big, powerful testimony where it's like, okay, they came from, but like some people, it is a small testimony. And there's a lot of beauty in that too, realizing that like, okay, God was always over your life and he protected you. He let, everything was fine. But there's a lot of beauty in all those different stories. But in terms of evangelism, we have a lot of like different kind of like training tools that like help us learn how to do that. And so I think my first experience with that was when I went to Winter Conference in Indianapolis this past December. And like they have a whole evangelism day where they train you on how to use this booklet called the KGP, the Knowing God Personally booklet. And they like, it's a little tiny booklet, and it basically just walks you through on like what the gospel is to someone who like maybe has never heard about it for the first time. So someone who has been a Christian their whole life, maybe for 50 or 60 years, would understand it, but it's also good for someone who's like a very first time, like just this is their first time they've ever heard about Jesus. So that's a really good resource. And then they teach you how to use these things called perspective cards. And basically what that is, I really love this tool. Basically it's a form of, it's kind of like a card game. And imagine like you and I are sitting here talking, and I basically am just asking you your perspective on things. And then if you want to hear it, I'll give you mine too. So I could be like, oh, what are your thoughts on, who do you think created the universe? Or do you think anybody did? And you would say, well, there may be a higher being, but there may not. Like, or, there's another question where it's like, what do you think Jesus was? And, some people say he was, a political leader, or, like all these different things. And so there's just different answers. And then it's our way of like being able to give our perspective on it and like,
nice,
just see where that looks like. But, I'd say like Cru was probably the first time that I ever really realized that evangelism was like, could be a regular thing. I think like, just like in our own little community, like it is very like, it's like a timid thing. Like no one like wants to go out and really do it. Like it's not going to be like an everyday thing of like, oh, let's go stand on the street corners and tell everyone about Jesus. Like that's not, a regular thing. But I think like being at OU, like I started to realize that could be a regular thing, and then it became a regular thing. We had people going out and doing evangelism marathons, and we had Evangelism Academy. It was called Outreach Academy. And then we had I've got like probably, I don't even know, 50 or 60 friends who just went to Ocean City over the summer, or went to Estonia, or went on these different missions, and were learning how that they could use their evangelism and their ministry to reach people that they've never talked to before. And, using those resources like the KGP and, the perspective cards, they were able to meet other people where they were at and ask them, where they felt they could see God in their life, or if they felt they could see him at all. And, it was just so beautiful to like watch that even from like the distance while I was working here at the church, and just seeing how they were using, that kind of evangelism to meet other people and help bring them to Christ.
And I think that's really cool. Like a lot of the things that you said, that, when you have that come to Jesus moment and you find God in different times in your life, whether that be through baptism, confirmation, whatever that may be. I think once you have that moment in your life, and you have a lot of them, and we're still young people here, but we'll continuously grow in our faith and have those moments where we're like, wow, I was not on a good path, or et cetera, et cetera. But once you realize and have that moment, you look back in your own life and you're like, wow, I didn't even know God was present in my life in these times that I was struggling, until you find that.
I think it's like a continuous run on where like sometimes you don't see the full effect of like how long he's been in your life or how long he's affected your life as you go throughout. And then you hit those moments where it's like you do have that come to Jesus moment, and you're like, you look back and you're like, wow, he's really protected me from a lot, or he's guided me through a lot to get to this point. And you keep going forward and keep moving forward. And I think your faith is never ending. It's one of those things that it's like, even once you feel like you've fully accomplished everything and you're like, I'm 100% faithful, then you're like, ooh, but there's still some other things I can do. And what can I do to keep growing it? And it's that never ending cycle of improvement.
And I love where you came with the resources, and maybe you can give me those so I can post them with the link, because we are constantly finding ourselves. So how, when we're in our dark moments, or when, maybe we don't see God as bright, how can we still continue to share the gospel? You know what I mean? And we constantly go through life challenges, but I love that. I love that there's physical resources out there that, people can go to because kind of going back on the church itself inside the building, we've talked a lot recently about that. As a church, you have to come together in order to spread the news as well. Mm-hmm. And so how do you feel, or how do you see that, that the community and the connection and the accountability within the church, and how you can start your own programs or things like that within the church?
Yeah, so I think that can look a lot of different ways, but the way that I feel like I've been noticing that the most recently is that, one, like, we were never called to do ministry or walk with God on our own. Like, it's just, that's not what we were called to do. We're told that, a cord of 3 strands or a braid of 3 strands is like, can't be broken. So, we got us, we got God, and we got whoever else we're choosing to run this race with. And, I think for like the longest time, I think the reason I struggled the most in my faith is because I was trying to do it on my own. I was going to church on Sundays, I was going to youth group, but like that was it. That was one day a week. It was Sundays. Mm-hmm. I wasn't actively walking with anybody else. And so that's another reason why I think my faith grew so exponentially this past year, because for the first time in my life, I had a true Christian community that was actually pushing me, that was, constantly checking in on me and like asking me how they could be praying for me, or all those different things. I think the biggest like part of that is, just having that community to begin with. You need to find people who have similar beliefs to you and who are actively wanting to pursue a relationship with God. You can't be pulling dead weight. Like, you need to have friends who are actively, trying to pursue God with you, because I think it is so important to, evangelize people who know nothing about God. But at the same time, I don't think those should be your closest friends. Right. It's okay. I have those friends too. I have a lot of friends who are not Christians. But at the same time, like, they are not going to be in my closest circle, because they will not understand the spiritual approach that I'm going to take to everything in my
Absolutely.
life. Because truly, like, sorry, Michael.
No, you're good.
Truly, like, I think that when you accept God into your life, like, he changes everything. There is not an area of your life that he should not be touching or he should not be moving. And so I think like the biggest part of that is, like I said, just having that community. And when you do like have that community, they push you, they're praying for you, you're praying together, you're doing Bible studies together. And honestly, the thing that I've learned probably the most this year is just how much you can learn from another person and their own experiences.
Yes.
And like seeing how God's moving their life, just the different knowledge that they had. And I think, like you said, like kind of having the Methodist way and the other different ways, like there were so many things that I've learned just in this past year about the Bible and theology that I would have never, ever known before, just staying in one
spot.
Yeah, in one spot. Yeah. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just another perspective. And like, I have some really good friends from all different kinds of denominations, like who I've learned from, like some of them being Catholic, some of them being, Baptist, some of them being like, just whatever it is, it doesn't even matter. But at the end of the day, we're all reading the Bible and we all have thoughts on it. And there's so many different things that we can take from that and use that to build each other up and grow.
Right.
And it's I mean, it's known everywhere. If you want to be a good musician, you surround yourself by good musicians. If you want to be a good engineer, you surround yourself by good engineers. It's the same way. If you want to be a great Christian, you have to surround yourself by other great Christians. It's the fact that, like, when you're in a group all together, when we're talking together, you know, maybe I see something that you don't, or you see something I don't, and then that turns into a discussion of, well, what am I doing different? How do I see this in your way? What can we do to improve? And it's that continuation where, you know, when you surround yourself with those people, you grow even more and even more. And I've talked about it at a school. One of my fellow teachers at school, he used to coach wrestling, and he would talk about how when he would do anything with the students at wrestling, he had one student who was phenomenally good, and he just was insanely strong. And every single time he'd wrestle other people, he would win every single time. And so when they would go to practices, it would be very hard for him to wrestle, you know, somebody in his own school. He'd beat them all, but he would still do it every single day. And it would be the sense of, you know, he doesn't need this training. He can beat them with one hand tied behind his back, but he is helping them become stronger. He is helping them figure out ways that they can, you know, overcome opponents in the future. And it's the same way when you're a Christian. You know, maybe you feel that you have a lot of knowledge, and you reach out to these people who don't have that knowledge, and you help them grow, and you help them grow. But having both of those kind of sides where, you know, you have that group of people that you're like, I grow with these people because we're all, you know, excelling at this area. We're excelling at, you know, being Christians. We're excelling at trying to figure out ways to grow our faith. But then you still have that group of people that you're with that you're like, I'm here because I'm trying to help them grow. And you learn things along the way. You learn different things about these people. You learn different things about Christ. You learn different things about everything just by doing, you know, these simple, you know, reaching out to different groups, reaching out to different people. And they're never, you know, people you expect to, you know, talk to. It's just, they surprise you sometimes. They show up and there they are.
And I think it's so important as Christians that we accept our own flaws too when it becomes, sorry, I'm going to put this closer so I was moving. I think it's so important as Christians that we accept our own flaws in the aspect of what we can get better at in our Christianity. You know, maybe that's reading the Bible, maybe that's praying, because mine, which I've talked about on, I don't know if it's the last podcast, but that prayer ADHD is for real. I will pray at night. I pray in the morning and I pray at night. And then obviously in between that's needed. But I try to make 2 times a day for God, and I'll pray. And then I'm thinking about what my plans are for the day. And then I'm constantly, it's a really hard thing to just sit down and find that peace within yourself and making that clear space for God. And I think that's so important, because the sooner we accept things about ourselves, the sooner we can have better outreach to our community.
Yeah. And I love that you guys both said it that way too, because I do think that, like, the first step in order to being able to grow in your faith is being able to recognize the weaknesses that are in it, right, and realizing, you know, where your faults are and where your weak points are that need that, you know, reinforcement. And, you know, for a lot of people, I do think it is prayer, because, you know, and this is going to go back to Crew again, so sorry if you don't want to hear about that. But, like, I definitely think up until this year, like, prayer for me was definitely, and one of our student leaders, Jake Newton, said this in like a talk he gave one time, but he explained it like this. He said, you know, God is not a what do you say? Hang on. Basically, he said that God was not like some sort of spiritual vending machine for your wishes, like basically not a genie. And
well, that's what someone said in college. He's not Santa Claus.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and so realizing that, like, you should not only be praying when you need something or when you want something. And I think, you know, unfortunately throughout my life, you know, up until just this past year, I definitely think that's how I was, you know, viewing prayer. It was, oh, okay, hey God, you know, really hope this test goes well. Right. Like, please be with me, you know. And, you know, what kind of relationship is that? You know, there's no growth. There's
100% and 0.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, that's like having a friend that only comes to you when you need something. Like, that's the worst. Like, I hate having friends like that. Yeah. Like, oh, so you don't care about me at all.
Right.
Like, imagine like God being like, oh, she's back again. You know, what does she want now? Like, yeah. And so I think just learning this past year that, you know, prayer is just so much more than that. And, you know, we would have, you know, 24-hour prayer events, you know, led by our own student leaders. And, you know, that was the first time that I really realized, you know, what prayer could really look like. They would have prayer prompts for us, but we would read a passage and we would meditate on it, and then we'd pray on it. And we would pray for not only I think there's multiple steps to prayer, but we would pray for expectance and just telling God, we know you're going to move, show us how. Or there, of course, there's always going to be that need for God and wanting wanting things in your life. I feel like that's always going to happen. But I feel like the biggest and probably the first step whenever you open a prayer should always be praise. I always think it should be praise, giving that glory to God, thanking him for what he's already done, what he's already brought you out from. I think if you're forgetting that in your prayer,
got to change some things.
Yeah, you got to change some things, because why would of course I'm not God, but sometimes I like to think about it in a human form of way, which is wrong. I know it is, but at the same time, just thinking about how a human conversation of that would go. So if in a modulistic stance, if I were God and you were coming to me hey Olivia, I want a new car, give me money for a new car, I'm gonna sit there and look at you oh, okay, she's back, kind of I said earlier. And so just realizing that why would I, if I were God, why would I even want to help you if you're not recognizing me for anything that I've done before?
And I love that, because that's kind of leading to my last point on my notes, that consumer mentality. And I guess I'm sitting here thinking that if you're a member of a church, and this goes for any church, if you're a member of a church and you're comfortable sitting in a seat on Sunday and that's it, you're not doing it right. And the moments and the growth are in the church are in the tense parts, are in the moving, are in the constant adjustments, because the church should never stand still. And I think that sometimes that people use the church like it's a product instead of a family. And what can I get from it instead of what can I give? And I'm constantly, at least in my mind, this is not me saying I'm this perfect Christian or anything. I'm just constantly in my mind trying to think of how can I improve this service? How can I improve this event? How can we bring people to this event or bring people to the church? And I just think that you led that with such a good point on that. Like I said, if you're comfortable in the church, you're not moving right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes for everything too, because like you said, I love that you boarded it as the consumer mentality, because that's exactly what it is. It's very much a kind of like a transaction. It's
right.
You're sitting there and you're okay, I came to church today, hope I leave moved, or
right.
hope I, and a lot of times though, that only lasts for so long. And it's kind of you get your hit of Christianity for the day, and then you go about your week and you're oh, okay, it's Sunday again, let's go get another one. It doesn't work that way. And so I think just realizing that your faith is not going to be constant. And I was kind of thinking about this when you were talking earlier, Michael, that there is never going to, your faith is never going to be constant. And so you were talking about coming to Jesus moments and realizing that you're going to have a lot of those. You will never have just one come to Jesus moment. I can probably count about at least 5 or 6 that I've had where I'm okay, let's get back on track. But with that consumer mentality in mind, realizing that you're not always going to be, the best servant. It's not going to happen. But realizing that you can still give everything when you have nothing. Mm-hmm. We have a pastor in Athens, and he says you can give your time, treasure, and your talent. Those are the 3 things that you can give, not always, but those are 3 of the things that you can give. And so time, just being present, just showing up, that can be physical serving, that can be coming to church, that can be being in your choir, that can be anything. And then your treasure, that can be, offering, and that can be gifts, and that can be, giving tithes to the church, or that can, it can be so many different things. And then talent, everything that you guys do musically for the church, that would count. If you're a good speaker, get up and speak. If any way that you can serve your church, it literally doesn't matter what it is. But there is always something, no matter what situation that you are in, that you can do to serve God within your church. Right. And that might always look different, but there's just so many options.
Well, and we've talked about it multiple times where it's we say that, everybody's good at something. You can always serve them some way. And I think tying it back into, growing as a Christian, you may be fantastic, and your way of showing that you are a good Christian is serving by, cooking food for people. And you do it every single event that the church holds, or you do every single thing, but why can't we start spreading it out? And maybe you aren't good at serving in the sense of ministry with other people or sitting down and talking to people. Maybe that's not somewhere you're good at, but as a Christian, you have to grow. You have to find ways to grow. So pushing yourself outside of that realm of comfort, finding those things that you're like, I just need to do this because I know it's going to make me a better person, or it's going to fulfill me a little bit more. And it may be scary. I'm an introvert at heart, and I don't like being around people sometimes, and that's okay. But I still find those times where I'm like, I don't want to do this, but I know it's going to make me feel better, and it's going to make me grow as a person or as a Christian. It's going to find a way to make me grow. So finding those opportunities to say, I'm not good at this, but I'm going to give it a chance, and I'm going to try to grow, and I'm going to try to learn how to be a bigger person or learn how to grow. So,
and kind of, I usually try to end with a verse, and we can, have discussion points over this too. Luke 9:23 says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. And that the cross was always used as an instrument that signified death. And that's where, Jesus died. And we are called to, take up our cross, not our preferences. And I think it's so important. I think that kind of wraps everything up that we've been talking about, that like I go back on what I was saying before, that you do not have to, once you find your faith, and we, going back from what we were talking about, find your faith, find, what maybe your flaws are, and finding out where you fall in the church, that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to question. It's okay to, have these moments of doubt and things like that. That's the point of growth and things.
And I think like your verse, reading through it, talking about the cross, it's that ultimate like turnaround point where before Jesus was put on a cross, it was used to humiliate people. It was used to signify their death. It was used to kind of degrade people. And when Jesus hung on the cross, it kind of turned that mentality around. It was that mentality that, the cross is no longer a humiliation. It's a significant of revival and life again. And I'm changing and growing and continuously doing it. So I think it's just that ultimate sign that we're continually moving forward, and we're going forward, and we're growing as Christians. Yeah,
it's just the ultimate point. If that taking up your faith and taking up the cross, it's the cost of following Him. Yeah. That's where you've put yourself, and being a Christian is not just attending a church on service, or being a Christian is not just asking for certain things in prayer. It's truly deep diving into yourself and finding out where you belong and how you can spread the news of God.
Well, and that's why, ever since I heard my friend Audrey say this, it's like my catchphrase now. And I've said it before in my sermons that you guys heard last week, but your mission field is truly between your own 2 feet, wherever you are. And this kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier, how people think that only a pastor or a preacher or, a church staff member's job, it's their job to be the one evangelizing and spreading the word of God. But truly, God is wherever you are. And so why are we not sharing that wherever we are? And that can be used in anything. I liked your cooking example, because I think especially at least in our own church, that is how a lot of people want to use their ministry. And so just showing up and being oh, okay, well, I brought, cookies, or I brought this, that's how they're showing the light of Christ in their own life. And so just realizing that serving looks different for everybody, and it truly is just whatever God has put on their heart. But that is, their own ministry.
Absolutely. Was there anything else that you want to talk about?
I don't think so.
Anything else you want to mention that I could cut out, or that
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that everything's summed up in that. It's just that it's so important to, and it all starts with you. And I like that quote. I'm gonna have to get these resources from you, the KGP or whatever it was called, and then the quotes. And you're very well spoken, and I think that's really important. Like I said, I've seen your faith grow at Central Trinity, but that not seeing you for a year too often, and then coming back and watching your faith grow. And that only happened not because you didn't grow up, in the church, or you didn't read the Bible and things like that, because you experienced being a Christian in the world and what that looked like. And I think that's so important, and wraps up everything we talked about on how the church is just a building, and that we can only grow and we can only bring people in by showing the light and the news of God. So I think that's all we have for today. I really thank you for coming. She leaves town next week, so we're excited for her, but also we'll be a little sad that she'll be gone. But I think that's all we have for today. So I'm going to let Michael take it away.
Yeah, and it's the end, so we always have to end with an anchored out.
I cut that part out. I don't do the peace sign.